tell us how from optics solutions you actually took a deep dive into legal tech?
As a developer of optics solutions, I joined as a junior and made my way to senior and eventually head of development after a couple of years. So after 10 years at optics, I followed my passion for business and wanted to start a company, and the opportunity just made a lot of sense to build a virtual data room that was easy to use and have clients ready to go that would use the platform.
Could you perhaps help us better understand what virtual data rooms really are?
Basically, a platform that used to be typically in the law firm's offices, where people would collaborate around a deal, where one party, say, or several parties that could represent the buyer, for example, and then the seller would all come together and ask questions about the company, like information about the contracts, the employees, the company structure, and everything they need to conduct their due diligence into the transaction. A virtual data room replaced that physical requirement, and now it's all basically done online.
What was the market like, and what do you think the market is like now for legal tech, particularly?
Years ago, legal tech, I mean, it was a thing, it's always been a thing, but it wasn't so much buzz around it. And we kind of underestimated big time, like the resistance to tech and change. We saw a lot of buzz over the years. It's part of the reason I started LawTech Live, was to start to curate and build that community, because the interest just wasn't, quite frankly, there. And
What exactly is your involvement with the Center for Legal Innovation?
Sure. So it's run by Terry Mottershead in Australia, and it's designed to empower the future lawyer. It's designed to get people collaborating, focusing on innovation and tech. I'm their UK advisor, and I often feel like I get imposter syndrome a lot with this, because they have such incredible people on the panel and like so engaged, and they have these amazing discussions in Australia. And like,
What do you think generally are the kind of things that legal tech companies are doing very, very wrong?
I think overstating what they can do is quite common. I think it's less common than it has been. We've all seen various headlines about certain companies that have kind of, overstepped the mark. I always say this as just general advice to anyone wanting to get into legal tech or in the law and things like that. Don't be afraid to change. Don't feel like you've gone too far down the rabbit hole to like make a big shift in career or what you're doing.
Hi, Nick. Thank you so much for taking out the time to do this interview with Prolog today. For everybody who's joining us, Nick Watson is the co-founder of Ruby Datum, but it doesn't stop there. He's also the founder for Legal Legends, LawTech Live, and does a lot of things ranging from traveling the world to DJing. We will definitely get Nick to share his secrets of whether or not he owns a time turner towards the end of this. But just to begin, where it all started, Nick, right? You were a developer at this firm called Optics Solutions. Can you perhaps speak a little bit to that, and then tell us how from Optics Solutions you actually took a deep dive into legal tech?
Hi, sure, yes, it's great to be here, and thank you for having me. As a developer of optics solutions, I joined as a junior and made my way to senior and eventually head of development after a couple of years. And we kind of built bespoke projects for hundreds of clients and verticals, some of which were software as a service applications. And we had about 3 or 4 law firm clients at the time, many of which were asking for recommendations on a virtual data room. And at the time, there wasn't really any with a good user experience. So after 10 years at optics, I followed my passion for business and wanted to start a company, and the opportunity just made a lot of sense to build a virtual data room that was easy to use and have clients ready to go that would use the platform.
Okay, so for our audience, because a few of them may not have really worked with a law firm or a structured organization. Could you perhaps help us better understand what virtual data rooms really are?
Yeah, sure. So a data room, or if you're American, a data room, is basically a platform that used to be typically in the law firm's offices, where people would collaborate around a deal, mostly M&A, but it's also used in real estate and so on, where one party, say, or several parties that could represent the buyer, for example, and then the seller would all come together and ask questions about the company, like information about the contracts, the employees, the company structure, and everything they need to conduct their due diligence into the transaction. A virtual data room replaced that physical requirement, and now it's all basically done online.
Great. And in terms of virtual data rooms, what kind of things do generally people require, right? What are the features they're really looking out for?
We've probably got over 100 features, and I doubt I've got
Wow.
time to list them all now.
Sorry.
But
So, I mean,
uh,
maybe like the bare minimum that people are looking at, right? That a lot of virtual rooms do not really provide at the moment.
yeah, sure. So a good search feature is essential to be able to find the documents you want very quickly. It's basically, if you think like a Dropbox or Google Drive, where you can manage documents and set permissions on things, but a little more advanced than that, like the permissions are a lot more like customizable, and you can see who's doing what. You can completely lock down the platform if you need to, set up groups that have permissions. You can redact information, you can watermark things. And then there's a load of other features around questions and answers. So you can ask questions about the documents, even within the document, and people can go and respond. But permissions kind of overlays everything. So you can control who can respond, who can view things, who can download things or print things, and so on. So there's a strong emphasis on security. But also collaboration, because the whole, it replaces both document management and the email communication, kind of centralizes that into one place and gives you oversight as to activities, so that you can gauge interest into a transaction from how the user's behaving.
So while there are so many different sort of settings, right, that a person needs to send, whoever is really monitoring the data room, and of course, you're talking about a lot of other features as well, like commenting on a document itself and just so much that's happening, right? How do you, or how does Rubydatum really take all of these features, provide it to the end user, but also keep it user friendly? Because like usually when there's a feature overload, the product is just not user friendly, right? You need like 2 months to just get anybody kick started on using the product. So how are you really balancing the two things?
There's a number of methods we use. I've got a couple of videos out there on YouTube as well about user experience, but ultimately it comes down to a few simple concepts. One is we don't just shoehorn every feature we can in there. If someone requests it, we actually do a bit of research into the feature and ask our other clients and explore the market to see if it's actually a feature people want or will use. But we go a step further and actually try to understand the business case behind that feature. So we do a lot of research there, and we try to really understand why that feature is being built. And quite often we can come up with an even better solution than what is being proposed. And the benefit of this is that you don't end up with an interface that's just cluttered full of information. It's like when you go into a restaurant and you have like a short menu or a long menu. And if you have a long menu, you've got a lot of choice on there, which is great, but you struggle to choose what you want because you're just overwhelmed. And we apply a similar concept to a user experience and try to keep the interface simple. And we don't put features in there if you don't have permission to see them as well. A lot of things can be turned on and off by the admin. So if you don't need redaction, that could be turned off. If you don't need questions and answers, that can be turned off. And everything can be completely locked down and like simplified, so that you just have a data room that is fit for purpose for the case that you're implementing it for. And you can store it all into a template as well, so it's just ready to go the next time.
That sounds great. So just in terms of Ruby Datum and how you've been building it for the last almost 7 years now, right? When you started it, what was the market like, and what do you think the market is like now for legal tech particularly?
Good question. I'll try and yeah, make my answer as tame as possible. But basically, when we came into the market 7 years ago, legal tech, I mean, it was a thing. It's always been a thing, but it wasn't so much buzz around it. And we kind of underestimated big time, like the resistance to tech and change in the law industry. And we saw a lot of buzz over the years. It's part of the reason I started LawTech Live, was to start to curate and build that community, because the interest just wasn't, quite frankly, there. And especially around user experience, when efficiency isn't exactly top of the agenda when you're billing per hour. So we have seen a lot of resistance, and it's been incredibly tough, I'm not going to lie. But over the years, we have seen improvement. Unfortunately, the legal tech market was tarnished a bit by over promising and under delivering,
Yeah.
especially from some AI companies. So whilst it was like booming and booming and booming, I think like now it's kind of gone back almost, I wouldn't say 7 years, maybe 5 years. And that risk aversion is like back on the agenda again. And law firms are kind of looking to simplify things a bit more and just tread a bit more carefully, because I think a lot of people did get burned.
So that's very interesting, and I know you're giving us a tamer version on everything. Though I'd encourage otherwise, of course, only if you're comfortable, because it's interesting. I mean that resistance is still very much there, and I think you sort of picked up the right side to say perhaps you've gone 5 years back, because right now, at least in India, people are still rejoicing over the fact that a lot, like a massive shift happened during COVID, but in the last 1 year, a lot of it is already undone, right? So in such a market, how do you really get the conversation started, and how do you prime people to have that conversation? What has been working in your experience? And particularly here, I do want to understand more about LawTech Live, right? Like, what are you doing? What is the community doing? And we can talk more about it as we go.
Yeah, sure. So you probably notice there's a lot of moves happening in legal tech across law firms. Like you see innovation managers and tech people in tech roles moving from firm to firm quite frequently. And when we kind of approach with the Rubydatum platform, they're incredibly interested and excited, and they bring people on the call. And sometimes this can go on for like 6 to 8 to even 12 months, where we're just having conversations and a lot of feedback, and we're working on pilots and things, only for the end of the pilot or the person to come back to us and say, look, we've been told no. We're really gutted. We really wanted to work with you. And I've spoke with many of these like in private, and it is a common scenario where they get excited about change and they're brought into a firm to implement change, but then they just get told no, and they quite quickly decide to move on from that role. And I think you see this a lot in the industry. So many firms like ours are looking to diversify and pivot a bit now. And, just like lawyers are moving more into in-house roles and tech roles than into private practices, we're actually seeing tech firms as well start to focus more on in-house counsel and end clients and businesses, as opposed to law firms, just because of that reluctance to implement innovation.
So that's, I mean, I understand that, particularly because I sit within a law firm, right? What kind of things tend to work? I think that'll be great advice if I could get it.
Yeah, sure. So I think empowering and embracing the people that we're pitching to actually give them as much knowledge to state a business case to whoever's making the decision, and especially how that can translate to a numerical value. which is hard to do if you're improving efficiency and saving hours. But there are good statistics out there now. Like there was a Walters Kluwer report last year that highlighted how in-house counsel and people are starting to demand tech now, and how tech-enabled law firms are producing much higher profits than their average kind of rivals. So the statistics are there now, and you can actually like bring them to the forefront of the discussion, so that when they go to the superiors or to whoever's making the decision, not necessarily always a superior, that they have the right information to be able to state that business case, not just, oh, we have a shiny new box, what do you think of this? And the person making the decision may not even know what a virtual data room is, for example. So it's hard for them to see the value.
Sure. And just coming back to LawTech Live, right? You mentioned that there was clearly like a lot of resistance, and one of the things you're trying to solve with LawTech Live is that, but I'm sure it does do a lot of other things. So what really is LawTech Live?
Sure. I started it. Well, when I started Rubydatum 7 years ago, I made a decision to move to London, because where I lived in the southwest of the UK was fairly kind of tech adverse at the time, and there wasn't much networking opportunity. It was like in the countryside and by the coast and things, so it was very slow there. So I moved to London and was quite surprised that there wasn't really any networking groups of technology in the law sector at the time. So I started what was known at the time as LawTech London, just so I could meet people and start networking. And it just kind of gained traction really quickly, and people started coming to the events, and yeah, it gained in popularity. And then as we went more digital over the pandemic, we rebranded to LawTech Live to reach more of an international audience as well. And yeah, that's how LawTech Live kind of came about. Before, it was like also really, really hard to speak with people at law firms because they often had a secretary, and whose job it was to vet out sales calls and things. And, you know, it's understandable when there's hundreds of legal tech providers out there all trying to pitch their solution, and there needs to be a filter of some sort. So what better way than to engage with people than to, you know, start working groups and discussions and events and things like that. So that was the original reason for LawTech Live, but since then it's grown to something so much more. Over the years, I've noticed such a lacking kind of well-being and mental health awareness within the law. It's a lot better now than it was 7 years ago, but I think it still is a problem. You know, 1 in 4, I think it's 4 times more likely that a lawyer will have mental health issues than the general average in other industries. So it was something that resonated quite strongly with me, and I was hearing some very upsetting stories. So we wanted to work in more sessions around well-being and putting people first, and as well as just the tech and innovation side of things.
That's great. And I know there are like a lot of other things also that you work upon. One is the legal legends, the other is the legal forecast. You're also on the advisory board for Center for Legal Innovation. I may be missing a few, so please jump in. But I'm interested, right? Because and we can just pick each of these very quickly. What exactly is the legal forecast?
The legal forecast. What do you mean? Sorry.
You have been an advisor and a mentor to the legal forecast, which
yes. Sorry.
No
That was a couple of years ago, maybe even more. That was it was in collaboration with the Center of Legal Innovation in Australia. Actually, it was like a mentorship program that they ran, and I was one of the mentors for one of the new legal tech startups.
Oh, great. And what exactly is your involvement with the Center for Legal Innovation? It'll also be helpful if you could just quickly walk our audience through what the Center for Legal Innovation really is.
Yeah, sure. So it's run by Terry Mottershead in Australia, and it's designed to empower the future lawyer. It's designed to get people collaborating, focusing on innovation and tech. I'm their UK advisor, And I often feel like I get imposter syndrome a lot with this because they have such incredible people on the panel and like so engaged, and they have these amazing discussions in Australia, and I feel gutted because the time zone works out like it's 1 a.m, and so much productivity comes from these meetings, and I kind of like just jump in every once in a while and like say a few words, and yeah, it's nothing in comparison to what some of the other people are doing for Centre Legal Innovation, but I feel extremely honoured to at least be a small part of it.
And what exactly is the Legal Legends?
I started it 2, maybe 3 years ago because we're getting a lot of inquiries for support with user experience and development around other tech that wasn't Rubydatum. So started that just as a way to kind of channel those consultancy services into the clients that needed it. We kind of like not put too much work into that because Rubydatum's the primary focus, but if those opportunities do arise, then we have that company that we can use for consultancy. Quite often Rubydatum can come into the picture somewhere anyway, because it's such a powerful product that can be often used for MVPs and the like.
And since you're back on the conversation about Rubydatum, it'll be interesting if you could tell us what all jurisdictions you're focusing on. And I know there are a lot of like very interesting projects that you've run with a couple of law firms. So if you could share something on that with us to help the audience understand what really Rubydatum has a potential for. Just, I know it's just so much more than a basic VDR. So those two things can be very, very helpful for us.
Yeah, sure. So we're working on some pretty exciting other avenues. Like we integrate like task management, form and data capture and custom fields and the like into the data room because it can offer so much more with these features. So a few example use cases is internally we're using it to manage all our documents and kind of form capture for our ISO 27001 and 9001 compliance, and then be able to demonstrate that to the auditors each year. We've had a law firm using it for managing and tracking multiple RFPs from different parties, and they can tag the documents to like the question sets and everything, and set up who's responsible internally and priorities and if it's been resolved or not and things. We also have one client using it to offer FCA compliance services to financial firms. So they have the whole document repository in there, but then they have forms for like conflict of interest reports, gift registers and the like, and it can all be logged and stored back into the data room. And because it can be stored and branded as a template, they can actually sell that as a service that's branded. It looks like doesn't look like a completely different product, but it looks like their product that's branded, and you can customize the words and everything and set up as much data as you want into a template that can then be sold.
And since you mentioned that everything that Rubydatum really does is user-centric, right? How do you think this really drives innovation within the product and within your company? Like, what do you think is different with how you're doing things by making it client-centric in nature?
It's all about people, I think, at the end of the day. I think Razmi on my team, absolute brilliant person, and yeah, everyone is very people focused at Rubydatum, so it makes it a nice working environment in general, but it means we've got really good relationships with our clients, and they're able to open up to us a bit more, and because of those connections, I think it really helps see renewals for one, but also the platform growth for features that actually people want, as opposed to what just we think they want.
And since you've been in this industry for so long, what do you think generally are the kind of things that legal tech companies are doing very, very wrong?
Have to be careful what I say here. I think overstating what they can do is quite common. I think it's less common than it has been. we've all seen various headlines about certain companies that have kind of, overstepped the mark with things. But I think that's probably the main one. I'd have to think about that one a bit more. Maybe it will come to me in a bit. But yeah,
Sure.
that's all I can answer on that one for now.
Sure. So overstating is definitely a big no-no. I get that. But just apart from that, right, in the kind of things that legal tech is solving for, just the problems that exist and the solutions that the legal uh, tech software on the market currently provides for, do you think that there's a gap there? And what really is that gap?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've seen all sorts of exciting uses for legal tech. I think there's a couple of avenues we certainly explore, but not had the time to in the past. But I think there's still opportunities that haven't been solved yet. One is just a centralized kind of service-based architecture and API that legal tech companies can use for commonly used services like digesting NLP. I mean, there's Spark NLP and things, but just accessible services just for converting to PDF, for example, that as a service, but centralized and secured and provided in a very kind of audited manner. I think there's a need for that out there, but also AI as a way to digest things in a more simple manner for the end user. We've seen like do not pay and services like this, but imagine if we could go on a website and the terms and conditions could instantly be summarized and provided to us in a way we understood, or a human readable contract can be generated automatically from legalese and output in a way that people will be able to understand. So I think end user kind of centric legal tech is where there is a lot of opportunity, and people that actually there's a lot of business case there, and they're less adverse to tech maybe being implemented as well. I think there's a lot of focus in legal tech around the law firms, but actually there's much more opportunity outside of that.
Definitely. And since you're speaking about just the end user, right, which can be you or me or just everybody, because we're all at the end recipients of law and justice, what kind of products on the market that you know of are doing brilliant work in the access to justice space?
Crowd justice are the one that first come to mind, because crowdfunding for legal cases, I think, is imperative to, justice. I'm not too in tune with that market, so I haven't seen too many. So I'm struggling to answer that one. Sorry.
No worries. Just a couple. We'll just take a few steps back, because you particularly mentioned AI as a tool that we can use to make a lot of the law that exists more comprehensible and digestible. One of the things I'll request you to do is perhaps break down AI and explain it like you'd explain to a 5-year-old, because I think there are a lot of like misconceptions about what it really is. And just start from there, and then perhaps we can look at more use cases of how currently it can be used.
I feel very underqualified to answer this question. I'm far from an AI expert. I know someone who is phenomenally good at this, though. It's
so I mean, a
Simplexico.
resource or something is also great, because then we can redirect our audience there.
Sure, Simplexico, I think it's .io. They're working just on this, like, training courses and things to simplify and explain AI. I'm actually considering going on one myself, because there's a lot of confusion out there. And yeah, we have implemented things like ChatGPT into Rubydatum as a way of summarizing documents and that. Everyone's got a different definition, it would seem, as to what AI is. But my understanding is AI is ultimately broken into different components, and the ones we see most commonly in law are the machine learning side, but the natural language processing side as well. So, NLP, or natural language processing, is about taking text, whether it's legalese or input from the user, and kind of digesting it into a way that a human can understand, a computer, sorry, can understand. Like it's can generate what's known as vectors, or extract key like tokens of information like a company name and intent or sentiment and various meanings that can then just be fed into a computer that then uses machine learning to, or it can use just basic algorithms, but machine learning to kind of digest that information and spot things like patterns, or reinterpret it and output in a different way.
Great. I think I have spoken to Oves, who runs Simplexico, so we'll definitely put the link in the description for this video. I just have one last question, Nick, because you are currently, again, traveling in a different country and tend to travel a lot, and also DJ. So how do you really manage all of this, right? Like just that kind of lifestyle along with building a company, and with members who also sit across the world?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it looks quite glamorous, but I spend a lot of time, probably too much, behind my laptop. I'm very fortunate to have quite a good team around me that are very proactive and don't need micromanaging, let's just say. So yeah, they're very suggestive and yeah, very loyal with their work, and it's a huge benefit, because I think a lot of time can be wasted on just micromanaging. So manifesting a good company culture, I think, is essential to that. Good internet is always a must. I've kind of turned myself into a walking doorbell. Like I'm on my phone all the time, and it's quite yeah, it's a habit that I need to like dilute a bit. So I'm looking at ways to kind of automate more things. We automate quite a lot actually at Rubydatum. There's like nurturing, for example, in our CRM, so that if a lead becomes less interested, it will automatically just chase them every few months and engage with them. We automate a lot of our like LinkedIn and outreach, and outsource all the kind of repetitive menial work to companies that specialize in like bulk data and things like that. So you can automate quite a lot these days, which is making our lives a lot easier. But yeah, I'm very conscious as to how much work-life balance I have, and trying to implement more of the balance side. That's partly why I go to these locations as well, because nature and sunshine and things like that I find very inspiring, and it gives me a lot of energy to be able to like keep focused when I need to.
Great. Thank you so much for being so candid about what a life or a day in your life really looks like. So Nick, that's all the questions that I had. Is there anything you'd like, any parting words, any last thoughts that you may have before we close this?
I always say this as just general advice to anyone wanting to get into legal tech or in the law and things like that. Don't be afraid to change. Don't feel like you've gone too far down the rabbit hole to like make a big like shift in career or what you're doing. I think it's important to recognize when we're like, constantly hammering away at something and it's not working for us. And then instead just forcing it in the direction it's like clearly not meant to go in. So I think that's what I'd like to part on. But thank you for having me.
No. Thank you so much for taking out the time, Nick, on a working day. And thank you for such a candid interview with us. I loved every minute of it. And I'm sure a lot of people will find a lot of value in everything that you've shared. I'll be sure to like pester you more about LawTech Live's later events, perhaps offline. But thank you so much once again for taking the time today.
Thank you, and goodbye.